Okay, let's just dive right in. We are about to tackle one of the most radical, most brain-bending ideas in all of philosophy. Seriously. It's a theory that questions the very foundation of who you think you are.
So let me ask you this question straight up. What's your gut reaction? You're probably thinking, of course they exist. I'm having a thought about this right now. But eliminative materialism, it challenges that very core assumption. The theory suggests our entire common sense understanding of the mind, your belief that you're watching this, your desire for a snack, might just be a complete and total illusion.
So, here's the game plan for this explainer. We're going to get right to the heart of it. We'll break down exactly what eliminative materialism is. We'll look at the powerful arguments for it, and then, and this is key, we're going to critically examine the three main objections and the really clever responses eliminativists have for them. By the end, you'll have a really solid grip on this whole fascinating debate.
Right, so what is this theory actually all about? Well, at its core, it's a direct attack on something we all use every single day without even thinking twice about it. And that framework is known as folk psychology.
Folk psychology is basically that intuitive toolkit we all have for navigating the social world. When you say he's going to the fridge because he feels thirsty and he believes there's juice in there, that's you using folk psychology. But eliminativists, like the super influential philosophers Paul and Patricia Churchland, they argue that this everyday theory isn't just a little bit inaccurate. Oh no. They claim it's a deeply flawed primitive theory, and that a mature neuroscience won't explain it but will replace it entirely.
Now, a key target for this eliminativist attack is a concept called intentionality. Fancy words, simple idea. It's just the aboutness of our thoughts. Your belief is about the weather. Your desire is for a slice of pizza. Eliminatists are really skeptical that this kind of mysterious property of aboutness can ever fit into a purely physical scientific picture of the brain. For them, it's just a feature of a false theory.
And this is the crucial point. Eliminativists are not saying beliefs are really just brain states. That would be a reduction. It's like how we discovered that what we call light is really just a form of electromagnetic radiation. Instead, they're arguing for elimination. They're saying that beliefs, desires, and thoughts are more like, demons or the mythical fire substance phlogiston. They don't exist at all. A mature neuroscience won't explain them. It will just get rid of them completely.
Okay, I know what you're thinking. Why would anyone propose such a wildly counterintuitive idea? Well, the case for it actually rests on some pretty powerful arguments about the failures of our current way of thinking. First off, they argue folk psychology is just an explanatory failure. I mean, think about it. Our ideas of belief and desire tell us absolutely nothing about huge mental phenomena like sleep, or how memory works, or mental illness. Second, there's the historical argument. Every other folk theory we've ever had, from folk physics to folk biology, has been proven completely and utterly wrong by science. So why should folk psychology be the one lucky exception? And third, there's a basic incompatibility. We talk about beliefs like they're neat little sentences in our heads, but the brain is this messy, complex, tangled web of neurons firing. The two models just don't seem to line up.
Now, as you can imagine, a theory this radical faces some serious pushback. So let's look at the first major counterattack. It's a classic philosophical objection that claims the theory is logically self-destructing.
The argument here is beautifully simple. For an eliminativist to stand up and argue that their theory is true, well, they must surely believe it's true, right? But if they have a belief, then beliefs exist. Boom! The very act of defending the theory seems to prove it false. It's kind of like saying out loud, I do not exist.
But eliminativists have a very sharp reply. They say this objection begs the question, and that's a logical fallacy where you assume the very thing you're trying to prove. In short, you can't use the assumptions of folk psychology to prove that folk psychology is true. It's a circular argument. You can't use the rules of an old, flawed theory to debunk the new theory that aims to replace it.
All right, let's move on to the next big objection. This one gets back to basics and focuses on the simple fact that, folk psychology seems to work incredibly well in our day-to-day lives.
And look, this is a fair point. We are absolute masters at predicting what people will do based on what we think they believe and desire. She's packing her bags because she believes she's going on holiday and wants to be prepared. It works. So the argument here is an inference to the best explanation. The reason our belief-desire framework is so darn successful is simply because it's true. It has to be tracking something real.
But the eliminativist has a powerful comeback for this one too. They point out that a theory can be super useful for making predictions and still be completely wrong.
I mean, for over 1,500 years, Ptolemy's Earth-centered model of the universe was amazingly successful at predicting where the planets would be, but we now know it was fundamentally false. The eliminativists suggest folk psychology is just like that, a useful fiction that gets the predictions roughly right, but for all the wrong reasons.
So this brings us to the final key objection, and it's maybe the most personal and intuitive one for all of us. It's the argument from what feels like our own direct private evidence.
This objection basically says, look, forget all this talk about theories. I can just look inside my own mind. I can feel my pain, I'm aware of my thoughts, I know what I desire. I have direct access to these things, so I know for a fact they're real. It's the ultimate trump card, right? My own inner experience.
But the eliminativist response here is a skeptical masterstroke. They argue that introspection isn't some pure, unfiltered window into the mind. Instead, they say it's theory-laden. This means what we observe inside ourselves is actually shaped and interpreted by the theories we already hold. A person in the Middle Ages didn't just see erratic behavior, they saw demonic possession. In the exact same way, we don't just observe raw cognitive processes, we interpret them through the lens of folk psychology. We see beliefs and desires because that's the conceptual toolkit we've been taught to use, not because they are raw facts of our experience.
Phew! So after all that back and forth, what's the big takeaway? Why does this abstract philosophical debate actually matter outside of an A-level classroom?
Well, the philosopher Jerry Fodor was not exaggerating when he wrote this. The stakes are immense. If the eliminatives are right, it would completely upend our understanding of ourselves, of morality, our legal systems, pretty much everything that rests on the idea that we are beings with thoughts, beliefs, and intentions.
And that really brings us to the central conflict here. On one side, you've got our deep-seated, intuitive, and incredibly useful folk psychology. And on the other, you have the relentless march of neuroscience, which is revealing a brain that looks nothing like the neat and tidy world of beliefs and desires. Eliminative materialism makes the bold, radical claim that these two can't be reconciled, and that ultimately our old story about ourselves is the one that's going to have to be abandoned.
And so we're left with this profound and, let's be honest, pretty unsettling question. Is that rich inner life you experience, your thoughts, your feelings, your deepest convictions, is it actually real? Or is it simply a useful, ancient story that science is now preparing to erase? That is the challenge of eliminative materialism.